Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most gripping stories of survival, ingenuity, and rebirth ever told. We are going to explore the legendary epic of Ergenekon. Now, this isn't just some old campfire story. It is the foundational myth of the Turkic peoples, an epic that bridges ancient geography with living, breathing, cultural heritage that is still celebrated today. We're going to break down its tragic origins, the dramatic escape, and impossibly fiery exit, and exactly where you can find physical traces of this magnificent story in our modern world. So let's get into it. So, right off the bat, I want you to really think about this for a second. How can a completely devastated nation be reborn from its ashes? Imagine losing absolutely everything: your home, your people, your power, and being forced to start over from absolute zero in total isolation. That is the beating heart of the Ergenekon Epic. It invites us into the world of the ancient steppe, a vast place where the endless blue sky meets the green plains. It's a story that asks us, what does it take to survive when the entire world is quite literally walled off against you? All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, The Great Massacre and Escape. To truly grasp this epic rebirth, we first got to look at the devastation. For a really long time, the Turkic tribes lived in total peace. But, as we see time and time again throughout history, peace can sometimes breed jealousy. Neighboring tribes united against them, and this planted seeds of hostility that eventually culminated in a massive, highly coordinated attack on the Turkic Khaganate. It was a brutal, bloody war, and ultimately, the enemy won. Out of an entire empire, only 2 men survived: the Khagan's youngest son, Kayu, and his nephew, Dokuz Oğuz, along with their wives. 4 people. Literally, that's it. Desperate to escape, they fled into this lifeless, unforgiving mountain range, navigating incredibly steep, rocky terrain for days. But then, as if by magic, they squeezed through this narrow, nearly impossible mountain pass and stumbled into a hidden paradise. We're talking a sanctuary entirely untouched by the outside world, filled with crystal-clear streams, endless green meadows, and fruit trees. The contrast here between the horrific, bloody massacre they just escaped and the pure, peaceful sanctuary they found is just so cinematic. Moving on to Section 2, the hidden paradise, Ergenekon. And the name they gave the sanctuary is actually super revealing. In the ancient language, Ergene meant steep slope, and Kon referred to a mountain belt or pass. So, Ergenekon literally translates to a steep, impassable mountain belt. It perfectly emphasizes just how incredibly isolated this paradise was. For the survivors, it wasn't just a valley. It was a fortress built by nature itself, completely cutting them off from the dangers of the outside world. So what happens next? Well, we start with the arrival of just those 2 couples. But in this sanctuary, centuries pass like a river flowing. Generations come and go. Those 2 families multiply, and then they branch out into diverse clans and tribes. Before long, the hidden valley of Ergenekon is just echoing with life, packed top to bottom with countless traditional tents known as otalar. But here is the massive catch. As their numbers exploded, their beautiful paradise actually became way too small. They desperately needed to return to their ancestral steppes. The problem? Over those centuries, a massive landslide had completely wiped out the only narrow path they originally used to get in. So they were thriving, yeah, but they were permanently trapped inside a mountain. Which brings us to Section 3, melting the Iron Mountain. Man, can you just imagine the tension here? An entire civilization totally ready to reclaim their ancestral home, but they are completely boxed in by walls of solid rock. But just as despair is really starting to set in, a brilliant blacksmith steps forward. He'd been scouting the boundaries of their mountain prison and noticed something extraordinary: a rich vein of iron ore running right through one of the massive mountain walls blocking their path. And he offers this impossible solution. He says, if we melt this iron mountain, we can open a way out. This is the exact turning point of the epic. It's the very moment where human ingenuity meets sheer desperation. He wasn't suggesting they dig through it. No, he was suggesting they use the raw power of fire to literally melt the geography that was holding them back. Now, obviously, this wasn't a one-man DIY project. It required the absolute unity of all the tribes working together. Step 1, they stacked unimaginable layers of wood and coal directly against the iron face of the mountain. Step 2, they constructed 70 massive bellows to feed the fire with oxygen. And Step 3, they lit it up. Just imagine the sheer scale of this. They pumped those 70 bellows until the flames roared so high they literally looked like they were setting the sky on fire. The heat got so incredibly intense that the mountain actually yielded. The iron melted away like wax, forging a wide-open gate straight back out into the endless steppe. It's just an unbelievable collective effort.
Let's move to Section 4, the Sacred Gray Wolf and the Exit.
Okay, so the molten iron is flowing, the heavy smoke is starting to clear, and suddenly the atmosphere shifts from this intense, fiery labor to something purely magical. The tribes were finally free, but they were looking out into an unknown, ancient world they hadn't actually seen for hundreds of years. They needed a guide, and that is exactly when a supernatural entity stepped through the smoke. This was Bertecine. Bertecine is the secret sky-maned gray wolf, described in the myth as having literal fire-spitting eyes. In Turkic mythology, the gray wolf isn't just an animal, it is the ultimate symbol of independence, deep wisdom, and divine guidance. The epic tells us this holy guide appeared specifically to lead the newly freed tribes. Following the glowing light of Bertecine, the Turks proudly marched right out of Ergenekon, heading back to their ancestral lands to rule once again. Now, let's take this incredible myth and ground it into something you might actually have on your calendar today. Check your dates for March 21st. According to the legend, the exact day the tribes finally exited the mountain was the very same day the world awakens from winter. Today, we know this as Nowruz. It marks the spring equinox. So when millions of people celebrate Nowruz today, they aren't just celebrating the blooming of spring flowers, they are celebrating the exact day of the epic exit from Ergenekon. It beautifully intertwines the physical awakening of nature with the ultimate human triumph of freedom and rebirth. Let's look at Section 5, Geographical Traces of the Epic. And this brings us to a really fascinating question. We've got this wild, epic story of melting mountains and hidden valleys, but is it all purely imagination? Or can we actually find geographical traces of this myth out in the real world today? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. If we map this story onto real terrain, the Altai Mountains and the Beluga mountain range provide that dramatic, impassable geographical texture that perfectly matches the ancient descriptions of Ergenekon. Then we have the Otoken and Orkhon region in modern-day Mongolia. This was the actual, historic, holy administration center of the ancient Turkic states, completely aligning with the ancestral lands they returned to. And finally, the Chatkal Mountains and the Fergana Valley hold these incredibly lush, isolated landscapes that perfectly mirror the descriptions of that hidden Paradise Valley. It's like a giant geographical puzzle coming together. So if you're a history buff looking to literally walk in the footsteps of this legend, where should you go? Well, here is your itinerary. The Orkhon inscriptions, along with the Bilge Kagan and Kultigan monument areas over in Mongolia, are absolute must-visits. These massive ancient stone monuments are the literal physical remnants of the very culture that held this epic so dear. And of course, various Turkic culture parks and history museums spread all across Central Asia and Turkey beautifully preserve the artifacts and the rich storytelling of this ancient era. And finally, Section 6, Living Cultural Heritage. Because, look, geography and ancient stones, that's really only half the story. A myth truly survives when it becomes a living, breathing cultural practice. The spirit of Ergenekon didn't just stay trapped in the past. It evolved, and it deeply influences the philosophical mindset of the people to this day. One of the most striking examples of this is the iron forging ritual. During Nowruz celebrations, it is still a widespread tradition to take a piece of glowing, red-hot iron right out of fire, place it on an anvil, and strike it hard with a hammer. It's an incredibly visceral, powerful ritual. Every single strike of that hammer is a direct nod to that ancient blacksmith's ingenuity. It allows the community to physically recreate the melting of the Iron Mountain, celebrating power, resilience, and their collective rebirth year after year. Which brings us to our final takeaway. Beyond the magical wolves and the melted mountains, the Ergenekon epic is fundamentally about a philosophy of creation and existence. It teaches us about absolutely refusing to give up in the face of total despair. It shows us the undeniable power of unity and the critical importance of living in harmony with the natural world around us. Think about it. If 70 bellows and a united people can melt a solid mountain of iron, how can that same exact spirit of resilience and unity help us conquer the impossible mountains in our own modern lives? It's a pretty profound thought to leave you with, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring the incredible depths of Turkic mythology. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.